So there's one last thing that we're going to just kind of touch upon with this scene, and that's adding really basic materials. So you'll see like your scene should maybe look something similar to this, and you'll notice that it's all pretty gray, and it's a little bit uninteresting. So you can apply different materials, and a material is basically it defines what color an object is, and also there's properties like how shiny or rough it is, translucence. There's an entire list of different properties you can change. Right now, for today, we're just going to cover changing the color of the object, so this can be a little bit more interesting. So there's a specific window that lets you kind of get an overview of the materials. It's called the hypershade, I believe. So you'll see this blue sphere at the top right. Do you guys see that? If you click on that, it should load up this editor. There's a lot to take in, so don't freak out.
Sorry, click on what?
I'll do it again. So this blue sphere at the top, sort of center. And there's another way you can get there. Yeah, so if you click on Windows and you go to Rendering Editors, it's also the third option. So, and it has that same little symbol. Does everybody see that?
Or if you go in the viewport under panels, under those save layout, I'm sure there's one with a hypershade. Because as soon as you have to add materials, you have to have this interface. It's kind of your friend whenever it's time to make materials and add materials.
Right. So there's a couple pre-made ones here. So the one on the very left, this is your default material that it just puts on every object, and that's why it's gray. We're going to make two materials, one for the bowl and one for the table, just for this basic example. So if you look at the left side under this create window, and you click on Maya, it gives you kind of a basic overview of the basic Maya materials. So the three that commonly are used are this Blinn, Lambert, and Phong. You might have heard of these if you've taken like Intro to Graphics. Usually the real only difference is just how shiny they are. So Phong is a really shiny material versus Lambert, which is pretty rough and matte. So we're going to use Phong for our bowl. So if you just...
And Phong E is even more shiny. So very high. Shiny also means reflectivity, how much it reflects the light.
Yeah. So you can double click that, and you should have this little window should be updated with the Phong here. And on the right side now we have this new sort of property editor. So we like to be organized here, so we're going to rename this to bowl. That way we know what it is. We're not going to get confused. In the past, when I was lazy, I used to just use the default name for all of them, and it gets really confusing when you have 5 or more materials because it'll just say Phong 1, Phong 2, Phong 3. So you really want to rename these. All we're going to really change is this color property right here. So you click on it, and it's going to open this little window. Choose whatever your favorite color is or whatever. There's a lot of options here. I'm going to make it a nice blue color. The way that they do it, you've got the hue is here, and then under it is saturation and value. So saturation is how like pale it is kind of, and then value is kind of how dark it is. So you kind of want to just mess with those until you get something. Just picks, you can also use these pre-made colors at the top left. So we have our bowl material. So we're going to make one more material to define our table. So all you have to do is go back to this. Is everybody good? Okay. So go back to the create one window in the Hypershade editor and just double click that Lambert, and it's going to create a new one. You can move it a little bit. You really don't have to pay much attention to this whole like weird node editor. It's not useful for right now. But so we have our Lambert here. You can select it by just clicking on it. So it should say like Lambert 2. We're going to rename that to table. And then, again, this is up to you what you want to make your table. I'm going to make it kind of brown. You can choose whatever you want. So usually and later on when we cover more materials, you're going to want to actually use a texture. So you'll find that when you apply these materials, it's going to look really basic. There are ways to make it look a lot more realistic, and usually that's by texturing it and paying more attention. So this is really just supposed to be kind of an introduction to what the materials are. So once you have both of your two materials created, we can actually close this hypershade window. Just X out of it. So you should be back in your normal Maya view. We're gonna first apply our material to the bowl. So if you just click on the bowl, you might want to right click and have object mode on if it's selecting the faces. So go to object mode like that, click on your bowl. So we have our bowl selected, and if you right click over the bowl and you hold down the right mouse button, there's all these different options that do a lot of different things, and at the very bottom there should be one. Oh, so I actually need to, here, it's kind of hard to see, so I'm going to right click higher up. If you right click too low, you're going to get kind of cut off, so you're going to want to right click from up here. You should see this option that says assign existing material, and it's going to display all the different materials we have. So there's the default Lambert, and then we have the table and the bowl. So if you click on the bowl material, it should assign that to our bowl. And so now you should be able to see this colorful thing here. If you don't see that, it might be because you have like a different view mode on. So you're going to want to make sure you have this blue cube selected. And
Also the key 6 on the keyboard shows
Yeah.
you materials. So if you are on a different one, on 4 or 5, sometimes you don't see it. So you have to kind of be also on the right. Also, one thing you can do, I need to show something that I do, that's what I do, is I middle mouse click onto the object from the hypershade. So if you have the hypershade and the objects kind of next to it, you go in the hypershade and from table you middle mouse click onto a geometry like that. It will assign that. Doesn't always kind of work properly because sometimes it does it one side at a time, and it might.
Yeah.
So it might be better what Zack was doing, but remember there's also that possibility. For example, I had a student that decided to create a character in which the T-shirt was yellow on one side and then had an image at the bottom. And what sometimes they did is they just, on the faces where there was the image, just dragged a different material. So you could actually go in and middle mouse click onto a face, and that face will take the material that you middle mouse clicked from the hypershade onto it.
I figured it was.
Yeah.
so the reason why it's doing it per face with this table is because it's a NURBS table. So the NURB, because they're not connected to each other, it treats them as independent objects. You might run into that if you used NURBS for your objects, but it should still work the same way. You just might have to select all of them.
It's true. In polys, it generally treats as one piece. But also remember, in polys, if you wanted to, you can go on the poly shape, control click on it, turn into faces mode, choose a certain face, and then middle mouse click onto that face, and it will only affect that face. You can do it either way.
So another thing that you can do to streamline this, if you have your table as independent objects, you can select them all in your outliner, which if you don't have the outliner open, remember it's the bottom left button right here to toggle it. So here you can select everything except for, your bowl basically. And when you have all those selected, you can do the same thing I did earlier, where you right click and hold down and then you assign an existing material, and it should apply it to the whole table.
Yeah. Now we haven't talked about obviously lighting or anything, so the
Yeah.
table does look a little bit boring, but it's just the first class, so patience.
Yeah. One thing I'll do real quick, you don't have to don't follow what I'm doing right now, but just to get an idea of what our scene looks like, I can,
He's adding a directional light, though. We should tell them that.
yeah. So this is just to give you guys an idea of what we're actually building. So I'm gonna click this button. Oh wait, that's using
Software, yeah.
oh, you're right, it doesn't have
It doesn't have it. That's why I told you, yeah.
That's
Yeah, we are talking about rendering editors. You know, what are we using? If we're using Arnold or what? And I was explaining to Zach earlier that I don't think we have it in the lab, Arnold. But the student version does have it. So if you download it on your laptop, you'll have it. Just as a watermark, I believe. But we will figure out what to do with this lab. So it's just temporary.
Yeah.
Matt did not know what to do yet.
Yeah, we'll figure that out. But the render is really important. It's gonna make the scene actually look nicer.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter how much amazing geometry you have without the lighting and the rendering.
Yeah.
It just doesn't do anything.
Oh, one thing. Oops. One last thing with our bowl. I forgot to mention. So, did you cover like the smooth option, like the mesh?
No.
Okay. So when you press 3, you get that sort of smoother look of the bowl. It looks a lot nicer. But it's not actually applying anything to the cube to the bowl. So when you actually export this, like if you want to put this in Unity or something, it's going to look like the really jagged one. So if you want to kind of lock in that smoothing, there's a button you can press. There's 2 ways you can do this. So one is to have the object selected, click on the mesh window at the top, and then if you go down about halfway, there's this option called smooth. And that basically applies that same smoothing, but it bakes it in.
It adds a lot of geometry. Do you remember when earlier I said that I always have milestones on which I save my work?
Yes.
And one is the low poly version. I do save as before I do this operation. So before you add a lot more faces, just kind of save somewhere the low poly bowl just in case you need it later. That's what I was talking about at the beginning of this class, by having milestone points in which you really want to save your work. This would be one, just before you smooth it.
So like one problem I might run into, if I apply the smoothing and then I realize I actually want the bottom of this bowl to be higher, now I have to select a lot more faces before I can do that. So it becomes more tedious. And especially when you're making characters, you're gonna have a ton of polygons when you smooth, and it's just gonna become a pain to try to move it around. So you always want to only use the smoothing when you're sure that you're pretty close to done with the model.
Like if you have a client and you're doing something for a client, they tell you, oh, can you please change that? You generally show them the smooth version because it looks a lot better. But then whatever change, you tend to do it in the low poly and then reconvert it, because otherwise it would be quite difficult to tweak so much geometry. So yeah, definitely save it before you smooth it. But that's awesome. You guys got some kind of a great panorama on Maya today. That's nice. And thank you, Zach.